Hi there and welcome to yarnspirations.com. In this video we're going to take a look at all the skills you need to make this adorable knit zebra. Of course you're going to need the pattern, and we show him all different colors in the pattern. You can use whatever colors you like, but you're going to need 2 balls of Bernat Softy Baby. We used antique white, or you could use as the cream color, but you could also use flannel or soft peach or soft fern, or frankly whatever color you like that make you happy with your little zebra. You're going to need a set of 4 US 6 or 4mm DPNs, double pointed needles, or size needed to obtain gauge. Now you're going to want your gauge to be pretty tight so that stuffing does not leak out through the work. You're also going to need a stitch marker, some polyester stuffing, black embroidery floss for eyes, and embroidery needle. And so we have all those parts here and we'll go over them, but look at this face. Isn't he adorable? So you need your embroidery floss, your stitch marker, a small mountain of polyfill, your yarn, and your needles. Look at that face. Okay, we're going to get going. The first thing I want to show you is how to make beautiful even stripes. So hang tight and we'll get started. So many parts of our zebra are knit in 2 round stripes. So 2 rounds in one color, 2 rounds in the next, 2 rounds in the next, 2 rounds in the next, etc. You don't have to cut the yarn at the end of every 2 rounds. You will float it up at the round join. However, if you just knit in the round and keep going and going and going, and you change colors after every other round, you get what we call in the trade a jog, which means the colors don't line up necessarily right next to each other. See, we have a cream colored one here and then the flannel over here, and then the same thing happens up here, because essentially when you're knitting in the round, you're knitting a giant spiral. So we mark the beginning of the round so that we know that we are knitting beginning and ending in the same place and the same number of stitches in each round. However, the yarn actually torques up just the least little bit to the left. So my round join is here. I just moved everything onto one needle so you can see what I'm talking about with the little jogs that they don't line up perfectly. So to knit a jogless join, I'm going to knit 1 round in the new color, just the way you normally would. At the beginning of the 2nd round, and we have an extreme close-up here because I really want you to be able to see this, I'm going to pick up the stitch in the old color that is below the first stitch of the round, put it on my left hand needle, and knit those 2 together in the new color, because that's what I'm knitting in. So it looks like that. You get a slightly elongated stitch. Now I'm going to go ahead and finish the round. So after I finish this round, I'm going to knit 1 round even in the next color, because I'm going back to the cream. And then in the 2nd round of the new color, I will pull that stitch up. So you are pulling the stitch up in the 2nd round of the new color. Now, our zebra friend here has 2 round stripes, so you're going to do this every time you change color. But if, for example, you were knitting with bigger stripes, say you were knitting a 4 round stripe or a 6 round stripe or a 99 round stripe, you only need to do that jogless join trick by pulling that stitch up in the 2nd round. So because we have a 2 round stripe, it happens in the 2nd round and then we switch to the new color. But if you're doing bigger stripes, it happens in the 2nd round and only in the 2nd round, because after that you're not changing color. So now we have done 2 rounds. Now look again, I know this is very close up, but I want you to see what's going on here. You can see here we have what looks like 2 rounds in the gray. Over here where the join is, it looks like there's only 1. We've essentially slipped a stitch, but it's going to come out much more neatly in the long run. So you're going to go ahead and leave that alone. That's exactly how it should look. So now I'm changing colors. We bring my cream up. Remember, when you're pulling floats vertically, not to make them too tight. Don't pull them too tight, and don't make them too loose. So this is the first round of the new color, so all I'm doing is knitting. Now you can use a ring stitch marker to mark the beginning of your round. I find on double pointed needles, because that's my favorite way to knit in the round. I know some of you are magic loopers or two circ people, but I've always been a DPN person. I can tell where the round begins and ends by looking at where the cast on tail is. So I did not put a marker, but you certainly can if you want to. So this is the end of my first round in the new color. And now on the first stitch of the second round of the new color, and I'm going to give that a little tug. It's only loose because it's hanging out there waiting for the next round. So the first stitch of the second round in the new color, I'm going to bring the stitch below the first stitch, which is in a different color. I'm going to bring it up onto the left hand needle, and I'm going to knit those two together, and then I'm going to finish my round. Once again, it gives you a slightly elongated stitch, but it makes your stripes line up horizontally. You don't get that little jog. Let's take a look at that on our zebra friend. So this is one of the legs, and I'm looking around. Oh, there it is. There's the round join. Now I can see it because if I stare right at it and look very closely, I can see that elongated stitch. But you see that the stripes line up horizontally perfectly. Whereas if I did not have that elongated stitch, there would be a little area here where they didn't line up side to side. So that is what that jogless join looks like after it is knit. So I highly encourage you to use the jogless join on all of the striped parts of the knit zebra. The next thing I want to go over is the loop stitch that we use to make our little friend's mane. This is a separate piece that you make separately and then stitch it on when you're doing your finishing. So to begin, and you only need 2 needles for this, but you can use the double points or straights if you prefer. Cast on 32 stitches and knit the first row. The second row is a loop stitch in each stitch, and then you bind off, cast off knitways. So let's look at this a little more closely. So I've cast on my 32 stitches, and now I'm ready for my loop stitch. So I'm going to begin as if to knit, inserting my right needle tip into the stitch on the left hand needle. I'm not going to push the stitch off the left hand needle at this point. I'm going to bring that tip up about 1.5 inches, and I'm going to hold it with my fingers, keeping it to the front of the work. Then I'm going to go back in that same stitch, knit through the back loop, and then push it off. So once again, into the knit stitch, bring up a loop, try and make them even. It doesn't matter if they're perfect, but close is good. Leaving that left stitch on the left hand needle, and then knit through the back loop, push it off the left hand needle. You're going to do this all the way across. Through the knit stitch, yarn over and pull it up till it's about the same, more or less, as the other loops you've got going on there. Having left the stitch on the left hand needle, and then go back, knit through the back loop, and push it off. I'm going to do this all the way across to make my zebra mane, and then I'm going to bind off coming back in the other direction, and that's all there is to that. Through the stitch as if to knit, pull up a nice long loop, don't put the stitch off the left needle until you knit through the back loop. One last time, as if to knit, pull up a nice long loop, hold it to the front of the work. Do not push the stitch off the left-hand needle until you knit through the back loop. And there it is. There's my little zebra mane. You can make it as long or as short as you want. And once again, perfection is not the issue. You want them to be approximately the same size, but if one's a little longer, one's a little shorter, it's no big deal. Bind off coming back, and then your mane is all finished. Now let's talk about French knots, or these adorable little eyes. Now on your instructions it tells you that you can put the French knot eyes in at the very end during the finishing process, but in my personal opinion it would be a heck of a lot easier to put them in while you're still knitting. So to make the head, you're casting on here and you're knitting in the round all the way up to here, and then you change to the stripe pattern. So you're following the instructions in the pattern. And your round join is down here because that little bit of an elongated stitch, which of course you're only seeing in the stripes, you don't see it in the solid color part. We want that in his neck so it doesn't really show. It's not disturbing to look at, but of course you want to hide everything you can hide. So I think it'd be pretty cool to try and put your French knots in when you're about here in the knitting so that you can see the back of the work. It's much easier to fiddle with, and you won't have stuffed it yet. So I'm just using a sample piece of fabric so you can see what I'm talking about. So I'm using all 6 strands of the embroidery floss. Embroidery floss comes 6 strands to the piece, and when you're doing actual embroidery sometimes you split it up and use different weights, but I am wanting to use all 6 strands and thread it to through my embroidery needle because I want the eye to really stand out. So I'm going to pick the stitch that I want it in, and I'm going to try, in this case, I'm going to try not to split the plies. I'm going to try and come up in a stitch, and I'm going to leave a solid 4 to 6 inches in the back because I'm going to use that later to tie a knot. Remember, this will be in the round, but since the head is that big, you do have plenty of room to maneuver. So to make a French knot, you're essentially making an overhand knot, and you want it to be loose enough that it has some height, but not so loose that it looks sloppy. So what you're going to do is make a loop with your embroidery floss, again, just like you're going to tie an overhand knot, and then insert your needle back through the loop and put it down 1 horizontal bar up over where you came in the first place. Now you want to hold that loop down like I'm doing with my thumb because you don't want it to go anywhere. So you can see the little, I don't want it to expand too much. So here comes my knot. I'm going to tug the strand that's on the embroidery hoop and the strand that's just hanging out that I started with. And I'm going to keep tugging, and there's my little knot. So once again, tight enough, let me bring that a little closer. Tight enough so that it has a little height, but not so tight that it pulls down into nothing and is invisible, and not so loose that, you know, it just looks sloppy. So to end it off, because this inside of the work is all going to be covered up with the polyfill, I'm just going to tie an overhand knot, double overhand knot on the 2 sides so that it stays where I put it. And I'm going to use my scissors to trim it. I don't have to trim it too close because, again, it's not like the little ends are going to hang out and be ugly. They're going to be all covered when this is stuffed with polyfill. Let's do that one more time. My little eyeballs on the zebra that I have as a sample were 10 stitches apart, so let's count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Wide set eyes are common for this kind of a toy, but you can make the eyes as far apart or as close together as you want. But you do want to try and get in the same row so that horizontally the eyes look the same. So let's see if I did that. Let's see, I think we're good. So I'm going to come up, leave 4 inches or 10 centimeters hanging in the back, and I'm going to hang onto it with my finger. I'm going to make a little loop with my embroidery floss like I'm tying an overhand knot. I'm going to go through the loop and down 1 horizontal bar up from where I started. I'm going to tie it gently, pull on that side, pull on the tail, pull on both sides until I have a knot with a little bit of density. Then I'm going to turn it over, tie the two tails together with a double overhand knot to keep them sturdy, and trim them close, but not too close. And there are my French knot eyes. Once again, you can do this after the piece is made. As you are making the head, the instructions request that you stuff it as you go. But again, I think it's a little difficult to find a place to weave the ends in. This is much easier to do before the piece is stuffed. So those are your French knots. One more thing I want to talk about is stuffing. All of these pieces are much more easily made if you stuff them as you knit. If you wait till the end of the knitting, say a leg or an arm, you've got to stuff all the way down into the tip, and that can be a little frustrating to do. So if you knit this far, put some stuffing in. Knit a little farther, put some stuffing in. Keep going. Now, the one thing that you do not want is your stuffing to be lumpy. So before I put the polyfill in, I break it up. I use my hands for just a minute and go through and make sure that it's not all clumping up in tight little knots, because you want the item to be well stuffed, but you don't see that big clump right there, and take that all apart, because I don't want a big hard lump in my polyfill. I want it to be as smooth as possible. So take a minute before you use your fiber fill to just go through and smooth it out. And then I'm going to put little bits in at a time. It's tempting to just stuff a big giant wad in there and hope for the best. But what happens when you do that? You get lumps. See how it looks lumpy right there and lumpy right there? So it's nicer to just do a little bit at a time and keep smoothing it out as you go so that it's even all the way down. So again, because it's knitted fabric, the reason we worked at such a tight gauge was to make sure that the stuffing is not exploding out the sides. So you want to stuff it so that it has some shape and form, and it's not floppy or loose. Here's a little lump. I don't want that, so I'm going to go in there with my finger and smooth it out. But again, don't stuff it so full that the knitting pulls apart and looks unattractive, or stuffing is escaping out through the holes. Once you have your pieces stuffed, you can stitch them closed before you stitch them onto the body of your zebra. Well, thank you so much for joining us as we made our knit zebra. He is an adorable little critter for any child, baby, or adult on your list, with his wonderful mane and his adorable little tail and his safely embroidered eyes. Thanks so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again soon.